Hi everybody, welcome back. We are doing CMS Data Cleanup with Excel, a walkthrough, and this is part 2 because there was so much to cover. We already did a part 1, and with that, I will get into it. Quick note on me, if you are new to the webinars, I'm the founder and director of VLOOKUP, 20 years in the archives, museums, and cultural heritage organizations sector. And I'm a business owner, consultant, author, speaker, and people first advocate. And if I didn't say my name in the beginning, it is Rachel Whitty. Few notes on housekeeping, and we'll keep it brief. A link to this recording, and if there were links sharing, which were not for this topic today, but links would be shared also in the chat. This session is pre-recorded so that I can deliver the maximum amount of information to you and answer any follow-up questions that you have in the chat box. Speaking of which, if you are joining us for the premiere on YouTube and within the webinar suite, you can, if you have a Google or YouTube account, use the chat box that YouTube provides to engage, ask questions, share resources, share your own Excel tips as you wish. The webinar video, depending on the device you are using, you can use the YouTube ability to throttle the screen size appropriately. It also does provide support for closed captioning. Another note on size is we did play around with the size this time for this part 2, because even though I was zoomed in almost 200% on the last one, it is still hard to see some of the Excel data areas, and I can't make the menus bigger. So we're playing around with some screen size in the recording. Hopefully that has helped with the size issue. And then finally, just please remember that this particular content is my intellectual property as presented to you, and just to be respectful of that. And a disclaimer that I am definitely not an Excel query expert, but I do a lot of data cleanup. And so the particular tools functionality that we'll go over in these webinars are ones that I use quite heavily with the kind of data cleanup that I see and that I do. And therefore, hopefully it is helpful for you all as well. And contents, we're keeping it brief because these are very full of things that we will be talking about. And main topics are Excel formulas, and then we'll get into Excel Power Query. Quick note on the free resource, the Oregon Heritage Commission and I partnered on creating an information guide to cleaning up collection information, and it was thanks to Oregon Cultural Trust and in partnership with Deschutes Historical Museum. So if you would like a free e-resource, please feel free to go check it out. It does talk a lot about data cleanup, both in the process and intellectual sense, as well as in the practical, how do you go about it sense. So it's hopefully will be very helpful for those of you who are entering in data cleanup. And I will note, we have done quite a bit working up to this moment in getting into Excel and Power Query. There are previous webinars where we cover talking about cataloging and best practices, where we evaluate and set the stage for data cleanup so that we know what it is that we are actually going to focus on to clean up and how we want to clean it up. And that we've done a whole part 1 on how to review our data in Excel and using some of those basic Excel tools. So for those of you hopping into this webinar, that's fine. Just know that we did cover some of the basics in other webinars. So if you see me being pretty cavalier about changing data and you're wondering why or how, go check out those webinars. Okay, Excel formulas. We are going to cover in depth the first 3, which is the clean, trim, and VLOOKUPs. The fourth one, the index, is an advanced take on the VLOOKUP, as my brain understands it at least, and is one of those where once you master the first 3, then maybe you can spread your wings and do the index query. It tends to be more flexible ultimately, but you do have to deploy it correctly in order to have it work for you accurately. So with that, let's jump in. For the clean function, this purpose is to clean up the data areas where there are non-printable characters. And so that means we can't see them, but there is enough of something there, like a carriage return, that you can't necessarily see, but it's there and it's going to mess up any sort of data matching or introduce some data messiness or sloppiness visually for your data. And so for a couple different reasons, we want to remove those. And so we'll get into an example now in Excel. Okay, and moving to the clean function, we have a series of data here, some of which, as we're looking at it, may or may not have some additional spaces or carriage returns. Those are those non-printable characters that may be present. So for example, in this particular cell, B3 that I am in, we've got some text, but we've also got that text sort of floating in like the lower 1/3 of the cell, whereas its neighbor just in the cell above, currently it's in just the normal bottom of the cell alignment. So in looking at my cells, I can tell this one probably has a few extra returns on it. And if I adjust my share screen a little bit, you can see this, this top box up here. And it's not necessarily important for you to be able to see and read the text, but I do want to point out that in addition to this top row of text, you can see with my cursor that I actually have at least 4 carriage returns, which is basically blank lines across the screen also within this cell, meaning that it's got a lot of dead space basically in it. And in descriptions, that doesn't necessarily break the description, but it can cause continuity issues. And in general, with our data, we just want to make sure we're working with clean data, especially if we're doing cleanup and migration with it. So using this particular example, just because it can be quite obvious when we're in this paragraph view here, when they don't match with the space. So knowing that I've got some of this happening, I need to enter in a clean formula to get the clean versions of these 4 or 5 cell examples. So using the column next to it, I'm going to do equal and then in capitals clean. And then it's going to want parenthesis and then what I want it to clean. So in this case, even though we know this cell is fine, I'm going to click on it and just do all of the cells. So when I clicked on it, you'll see that in my equal clean equation, that cell B2 has now populated based on me clicking on cell B2. I'm going to close the paren and then I'm going to hit enter. So what that's done is essentially copied over the text in a clean version. For this one, it didn't necessarily need it, that's fine. But when we click back into the C2 cell, we can see the formula up here, equals clean, and then parenthesis B2 parenthesis. We want to extend that formula to the rest of our spreadsheet. Now, you could go through and copy paste or enter in the formula multiple times. My lazy way of doing it is just grabbing the bottom right corner of the cell that we entered the formula in. So corner of C2, bottom right, I'm gonna grab it and then drag it down with me to each of the subsequent cells. And you can see it's already populated over here for C3. And for, I dragged it down, we've also got C4. And then let me drag it down further. And we've got C5 populated now. So in order to show you the difference though, in terms of removing those extra carriage returns, I'm gonna widen C here and wrap text. Okay, so now we can see our data. We can see in this original title column B, where it had those extra carriage returns in it. And now we can see the clean data here. Everything's aligned to this bottom line. And when I click into this entry now, it still has the formula. So what we're going to want to do is go ahead and copy this. And that, depending on your data and how much you're changing, there's a couple ways you could go about it. But essentially what we want to do is copy the data. In this case, I do want to just do a straight copy paste over it. However, I want to do a paste special. And so when I right click, I go to paste special, and then I want to make sure that I am pasting values. Otherwise, I'd just be pasting the same clean formula. So before I paste, we click paste special values. And what that's done is it's cleaned up column B now. And instead of seeing, in this case, the equal clean formula, now when I click into the cell B3, I'm seeing the appropriate content that should be here in cell B3. And I can label this the new title column, and then I can go ahead and clear out this extra formula data. And now I've got my clean data here that I can either populate back into my main spreadsheet or continue on with the cleanup work that I was doing. All right, similar to clean, we're going to do a trim function as well. This one is particularly important to mention because it does tend to be critical to use when we're trying to match up like record IDs or file names, file IDs to each other. And some of them may be perfect and pristine. Others, for various reasons, may have somehow gotten an extra space added to it. Usually after the number, there's a space or a couple of spaces, what have you. It can happen whether human or data error. And so we need to make sure we trim all of that data so that it doesn't have any of like the extra spacing, because we don't want it to mess this up. So let's get into the Excel spreadsheet. For the trim function, and like most of what we are working on, we of course have the ID column that we're working with on the left. In most cases, when you're doing data cleanup, just as a reminder, we usually always want to take the unique ID column with us, unless you're doing cleanup in a different way that ties the data together. This is just how my brain prefers keeping it straight. And then of course, whichever data that you are trying to clean up or match. In this case, for our cleanup, I do want to actually do some cleanup with these unique ID numbers. Similar to the cleaning example where we had those extra carriage returns, I've got some extra spaces hanging out in my unique IDs. Some of them it's one extra space up here, some of it's two extra spaces, some are fine. So in order to do some cleanup on this one, I'm going to go ahead and insert a column in between unique ID and title. And then similar to clean, we are entering in a formula, which is the equal trim in capitals with a parenthesis. And then I'm going to click on cell A2 as the first cell. I want to do the trim function on. I'm going to close the parenthesis and then hit enter. And so now what that's done is it has taken what was, I think, two extra spaces in this original ID, has now, well, currently shows formula, but has removed those two extra spaces, and we'll verify that in a minute. And similar to the clean function, now that I have got this formula in the cell, I do want to apply it all the way down. And so the way my brain likes to do it is just dragging and dropping through the rest of the column areas. Fun red color, because apparently I've got duplicate finding turned on. But you can see now that the values from the unique ID column have copied over and have removed the spaces. Let me go ahead now, because we have these values, we want to do the copy function. And then I do want to just do a direct paste over this, but again, similar to the clean pasting of values, we want to do paste special and then paste the values, because I don't want to copy and paste the formula. All right, so now when I click on these, there is no extra space. They're all clean and as they should be. We've trimmed all of that excess. This one, I'm not sure how we got the period in there in the data in general, but the rest of them, no extra spaces. So I'll go ahead and clear out this formulas column, and that fun rose color goes away because I no longer have duplicates, and I'll just reassign my unique ID column header. And that's the trim function. All right, this next one is going to get a little bit more advanced for you folks who are new to Excel formulas. If it's a little too much for you, don't worry about it. You don't have to use it if you don't want to. And there's some Power Query stuff that might make it a little easier for you. So anyway, bear with us in the execution. Otherwise, the concept itself may be helpful. For VLOOKUP, this is for areas where we perhaps have a more complex database where there are different areas where our data lives. And while those different areas reference each other, usually through like a unique record ID, they may not always come out in the same spreadsheet together. And so you may be working with multiple spreadsheets that have been exported out of your collections management system that you need to either migrate to a new CMS or you wish to clean up and then put back in your existing CMS. So in this case, we are going to go into a couple examples where we need to rely on looking up and matching those IDs or doing a VLOOKUP in order to tie some of that data together back into like one spreadsheet. So we'll go ahead and get into Excel. The next formula we're going to take a look at is VLOOKUP, and this one is one that predicates its accuracy on using the match criteria column as the first or leftmost column. For our purposes, we're going to use the unique ID numbers on the left-hand side. And as you will have noticed, they are the same unique ID numbers that we recently trimmed the extra white spaces from the extra just like type spaces, because if they had those extra spaces, they would not correctly match with their unique ID referenced elsewhere. So for our purposes, we would need to make sure those spaces were gone, which we took care of. And now I've got my clean unique ID numbers ready to be matched. For VLOOKUP, my lookup criteria, I'm confirming is on the left-hand side here. I have a blank image column currently where I want to populate it with the image IDs for these collection records. And I happen to have these image IDs correlated with the unique ID number, just not tied directly to that collections data spreadsheet. While it seems like this should be obvious and that they should all be together, I can't tell you how many different collections management systems I've worked with and migrated where these two things were very separate. So of a lot of the data cleanup and migration that we do, all of those typically include some form of matching digital assets back to their collection records. So you may find this helpful. My image files, I've got them, the unique IDs listed here in this particular spreadsheet for simplicity's sake for us using fake data for our exercises today. I have put my data selection into the same spreadsheet, but that is not a requirement depending on your Excel prowess. So I'm going to go back over to my VLOOKUP tab, which is where I have my collection record essentially, which we're just looking at the unique ID and the title. And in my image column, which is going to be underneath column C and in cell C2, I'm going to start my formula. So we're going to do the equal sign, and again, all caps, VLOOKUP. We're then going to do that open paren. And I know I want to start my match criteria based on our very first unique ID in column A, cell 2. So I'm going to populate A2. We're going to do a comma. And now I'm going to introduce the tab name for where we find that image ID. And that tab name, sometimes it's just sheet 2. I happened to rename it to image. So I'm going to enter an image and then for Excel reasons, an exclamation point. And I'm then going to tell it which columns it should be checking in that image tab to help match up to my unique ID. And I know I want it to look at column A through column B for that match. And then once it does find a match, and after we put a comma for Excel reasons, I need to tell it which number of columns I want it to take that matching data from. So once we've matched those unique IDs in this example, I want to make sure that Excel then brings over the data that is to the right of it, which is in that second column. So I'm putting a number 2 for it to grab that file ID from the second column. Why we don't call it the column number, I do not know for Excel reasons. And then at the very end here, and I'll adjust my screen so you can see it in a moment. There we are. I'm entering in a false. For formulas, false means in this instance for matching that I want it to be an exact match. There are formulas, and I believe VLOOKUP is one of them, where you could require an approximate match. So like it's close enough. For our purposes, we are going to require an exact match, which is false. We're then going to close the parenthesis, because every good formula has a closed parenthesis, and we're going to hit enter. And as I shift our screen back, we can see that for that first cell now, I have that image ID. We'll go check the tab to make sure it's the right image ID. For most of these, the last bit of numbers is the unique part. So I've got EAL. I'm going to switch to my image tab. First unique ID here, ABC, C1864, EAL. So accurate thus far. Going back to my main collection tab area, I'm going to do what I've been doing for the other formulas. I'm just going to drag this formula so that it auto-populates to the correct, in this case, using A3 as that next cell, A4 as you go down, etc., and populating those image names that are on that second tab. Now you'll notice I have a little NA box that popped up here because I dragged the formula a little too far, and so understandably it had no unique ID to match with, and so it was sad about that and gave us a not applicable. As with our other formulas, while we can see the image ID in the cell, when we click on it in the box, all we see currently is the formula. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to copy this column and then we're going to paste right over it. We're not even moving it, but we're going to still do, and let me move my screen so that you can see it. We're going to do paste special again and values. So it's going to convert those formulas and just leave us the actual values that we asked it to bring over. Move my screen back over. As we click through, we've got the actual values in there now. And that's VLOOKUP. And then finally, just a reminder on index, if you're feeling brave or you've done some formula stuff before, index is perhaps a broader take on VLOOKUP, again, at least as I understand it. Depending on the complexity of the data and what you need it to do, it can be quite helpful for you. So if that's an area you're interested in, I encourage you to test it out. Now we're going to get into Excel Power Query, and this is an area that I have been exploring and experimenting in more and more over this last year. For most of us, if we're in Excel, go into the Data tab of your menu. And at least for me with my Mac version, I then get like this little green power button in the left-hand side, and I want to select Launch Power Query Editor. And so your Excel spreadsheet that you're using will still be up, but it's going to launch and be ingested into a related but somewhat separate tool. And with it, we're going to cover a few of these different tools, and we'll do the show and tell all together within the Power Query. But a quick review of them is we're going to do format first, which is going to have that very familiar clean and trim function that we did with formulas. You may find it easier in Excel Power Query, so I'm going to show you how to do that there. Capitalization control, which is huge, especially if you're doing any sort of like tag or subject management, or anywhere where there's been like extensive use of capitalization that really should be changed to it, like a title case capitalization. We're going to then talk about the ability to add a prefix or suffix. This can be incredibly handy when you need to add or augment your particular accession numbers or file IDs. If you need to add like a building name before a location entry string. So multiple reasons or scenarios where those can be helpful. We're then going to get into delimiters, how to split text out. You can do this in basic Excel, but the ability of more nuanced control in Power Editor, I find is much more fitting for the kind of data cleanup I need it to do. And then related with that, of course, is like the extraction of text from the actual data that you're using. You don't necessarily want to split it based on delimiter, but you do want to extract it based on delimiter. So delimiter as a word is being used in here a couple of times, but to do a couple different things. And then we've split the data, but now maybe we want to merge the data. And so taking a look at areas where it may make sense to merge our data together and how we can do that with Excel Power Query. So with that, let's get into the examples. Now we're looking at Excel Power Query. I have already launched Excel and clicked the Excel Power Query button, selected the tab and everything I wanted to work on. And so what we're seeing now is the Power Query editor, at least the Excel version in Mac and what it looks like. I do want to point out that in addition to the spreadsheet content, this query settings and properties underneath on the right-hand side, it has a list of applied steps that it captures after each and every step you perform while you're working in Query Editor. And it has become very helpful for me, at least, when I execute a particular form of data transformation and it doesn't quite work how I wanted it to, or if I needed to adjust anything, you can very easily edit out or reopen the particular transformation you did and adjust it. So it's quite the lifesaver because you don't have to keep hitting like the undo button, undoing some of the other work you may have done, which was fine, but having a bit more finite control over not only knowing the steps you've done so you could replicate it later if you wanted to, but also having the ability to eliminate or adjust some of the steps you've made. So a couple, well, more than a couple, a few of the main features that I use quite heavily in the Power Query area. The first two of which is going to cover the clean and trim functions again. While it may be more comfortable to use Excel in its regular version versus this advanced Power Query version, I will point out it is much easier to run the clean and trim functions and a few of the other Excel formulas while we're in Power Query Editor, assuming that you want to do mass transformation with those types of formulas. All right, the first thing we're going to do is select the record ID column, and for me, that's the column on the far left-hand side. I'm going to go to the Transformation tab up here at the top menu. And I'm going to select, for my particular version, the format, which is the text box with pencil. I'm going to click on the box there, and there are several options, a couple that we'll get back to in just a moment, but you'll see here I have a trim function and a clean function. And these are the same functions of the formulas that we ran in basic Excel. We're just able to bulk apply it to an entire column without having to type in the equals, trim, paren, etc. So keep that in mind. If you're feeling brave enough to try Power Query, it does make things like that much easier. All right. While we're talking about format, I do want to talk about capitalization control because that does seem to come up quite a bit when we're working with older data. So I'm going to scroll over. Ooh, and we need to do some splitting too. Awesome. Okay. First, we'll do capitalization. So I'm going to select what is essentially the nomenclature terms for this particular set of fake data. You'll notice that the first part of the classification there is all capitalized, which is the stylization of nomenclature. However, for accessibility concerns, we want to make sure that we are doing title capitalization. So before I put in my new data, even though it is mimicking the nomenclature standards, I'm going to change the capitalization. So I've highlighted my column, gone back over to the format box, and you'll notice that I have the ability to make everything in here lowercase, everything in here uppercase, or I can tell it to capitalize each word, or what I would call title capitalization. And that is the option that we want for our purposes. And you can see here that we went from entire capitals for that first part of the classification to now that title style capitalization, easier to read and meets accessibility guidelines. And just so easy, easier than having to do like find and replace for everything. All right, I want to talk about prefix and suffix before we start getting into delimiters, because delimiters is one of those, like if your brain gets it, it's great. Otherwise, we can end with it. And if you tune out a little, that's okay too. But let's talk about prefix and suffix first. Okay, so this particular column happens to be labeled suffix, and what it is missing is like a building or some sort of, this is location kind of stuff, some sort of indicator of where these numbers and shelves and racks, etc., are to be, and they're missing. And so what I want to do is actually add a prefix to this location. I have my location column here, going back to my format box, and I want to add prefix. And for this particular one, I've selected a row where I'm going to assign the prefix to each and every one of them. If you need more finite control, then we'll need to split it up a bit differently. But to display the ability of this option, we'll pretend that this is all going to be in the Latimer building. And it's going to enter this text in front of each of the values in this column. So we now have Latimer to precede everything that was already in that column. Some of these had that underscore before as part of its location build out, and then you'll notice for those that did not have anything present, the prefix did not populate because there was no data for it to prefix to. This may also be handy, for example, if you are needing to add in a prefix for your record IDs. Perhaps you've reached a point where your collection's grown so much, you need to add additional zeros, or you are now part of several different institutions in one database, and so you need to add in, perhaps more commonly, add in your initials for your particular collection. So we'll pretend RCW is going to be our prefix. You can of course add underscore if you wanted. For our purposes, we'll do initials, and then I am going to add 3 additional zeros to my ID numbers. And so you'll now see prefix has been assigned, the RCW, 3 additional zeros, and my ID numbers after that. All right, and then of course, if we needed a suffix after it, we'll use my ID numbers for playing around. Suffix is of course what comes after, and so perhaps for this one, I want to start with a underscore to separate it out a bit, and maybe I'm adding in like a component count, or we need to adjust the particular ID numbers for whatever reason. For example, maybe I want to identify that all of the objects in this particular spreadsheet we've acquired during 2024. So I'm going to add the suffix of 2024 to my ID numbers, and now we have the underscore 2024 as part of my ID numbers. Now there is the text extraction that we can do. You can extract in, well, let me back up. In a basic Excel, you can do a little bit of separation and splitting. Power Query is, of course, much more powerful in some more pinpointed extraction, as well as different examples of how to select and split out data. So let me go over to an area of data where there's quite a bit going on. This is a good one. So this is like a mass merging of various subject tags, it looks like, that just got all populated into one cell for each of my items. And I'm noticing the pattern that I'll have a like pre-word of art as perhaps the main category, space hyphen space, and then it looks like it's New Southwest, American painting, dash, 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 painting American 20th century, etc. I'm noticing that the dash, dash, like the two dashes together, to me indicate that these are separate subjects. And so I want to actually split those out across columns versus them all being in one cell. So I'm going to select my category here and I want to split the column. And you can do it by a specific delimiter, in which case we'll do it using those two dashes next to each other. But you do have the added nuance of being able to do by number of character if it's always the same number of characters in each cell. You could do it by the position. You could do it by a shift between lower and upper or upper and lowercase, digit to non-digit, etc. So you've got more options there. We are going to do delimiter. And you can just do the basic, like, oh, yes, I'm going to, if we had like semicolon, for example, we could do that. Or you can do the advanced, and you can specify, for example, with ours, we have multiple double dash. We could do the leftmost double dash, the rightmost, each occurrence of that one, which is the one we're going to pick. And then if we want to split it into columns or rows, for our purposes, we're in a column currently, we want another column. And then you can dictate if you want any sort of maximum range of columns for it to split into. And for us, we'll just pretend like maximum of, let's see, probably not that many, probably 5. I'm gonna go back up here, go to custom. We're gonna do that double dash. And don't need to use quote or special characters. So we're gonna say, okay. So depending on how much data, etc., it could take your Power Query quite a bit. For ours, and again, because this is fake data, it went much more quickly for us, but you'll notice that my category that was all one long string, each time I had that double dash, it has put it very neatly into a separate column each time it occurred. So you can see just how powerful and easy it is to get that cleaned up and have data separated out that for various reasons got all smushed together. All right, and then let's see if we wanted to extract, because I did get stuck on delimiters for a moment. Let's see, let's play with this one. Click extract. For this one, it's a little similar to delimiters, but it can take some very specific things out. We can do first characters and last characters. There can be a range. We can also introduce the concept of delimiter. So I am going to, I think I'm going to select text before delimiter, and we've got some commas in here that I'll play with. So in this case, we're going to keep it basic. I'm going to put a comma here for that delimiter, and I'm going to say okay. And you'll see that it has taken out the particular text that was in before the column of these particular subjects, and it's extracted it completely from that column and from our data spreadsheet. So if it's excess data or junk data, or if you're cleaning up different subject terms, etc., If separating them out and keeping them with the delimiters is not your goal, but you actually just want to straight remove it, then extracting is the way to go. And then finally, if we want to think about merging, so let me see. Let's pretend that even though we extracted, or excuse me, separated out some of these subjects, I think we'll merge these two together. So perhaps either the data came out this way and I want it together, or I wanted these all separated, but now want to put these two back together for whatever reason and don't want to go through and just like cross out my little step here. Let's go ahead and select both of these columns. And then I want to click the merge column function up here. It's going to ask, because we're bringing two pieces of data together within one cell, it's asking if we want anything to separate that data to indicate that it had come together differently, or if for some reason it's a sentence and you need some sort of punctuation. For our purposes, I think I want a semicolon to indicate that it's two different things, but I do still want them in the same cell. And then it is going to give us a new column name because it's going to populate that new column with the merged material. So yes, we'll say merged fake data for our new column name. All right. And so you'll see that it's taken our two columns and it has put those words together, and it has given us a semicolon separation. So it's painting, semicolon, and then art Southwest. And then not so helpfully in our null cells where there's nothing in there, it's given us a semicolon anyway. So I'll want to go back through and eliminate the semicolons, which it is easy enough to do. But somewhat handy way to put data back together if for some reason it had gotten separated. And that covers the main power tools that I tend to use, or at least play with, when we're in Excel Power Query. Again, the more you play with it, the easier it gets, and you may even discover new tools and techniques that I haven't stumbled upon yet. But hopefully it's at least enough of an overview where you have a sense of, okay, if I have this sort of data problem, then I know I can do this type of cleanup in Excel. All right, well, I know that was quite a bit. If you want any insight or like how to help on especially Excel formulas, but even with like Excel Power Query, using AI support like Gemini, which was, I think, barred for Google and ChatGPT, etc. Just asking them the premise of like, I need to merge this data, like what is the most efficient or effective Excel formula? And so getting their prompts and instructions can be quite informative if you're not quite sure where to start. And for resources, just a quick reminder of that free e-resource. If you are in the midst of data cleanup or think you may be entering into data cleanup planning, I do recommend you grab that courtesy of Oregon Heritage to get tips and tricks and more information and support around that. And then again, just a reminder, the data that we dealt with was fake data, but also the data that we dealt with in the cleanup we did, that is typically informed by preparation work, assessment, reviewing the data in its current form. All of that sort of thought and process is covered in these other webinars. So I definitely encourage you to dive in and explore. But if you are seriously entering into data cleanup, it may be worth going back to watch those other videos. All right, and then questions. Any questions? I think we have a couple minutes left together, and otherwise I will see you next month.